Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today I'm returning to the Mandalorian poster that I was working on in the last video, and I want to really polish it and take it to the next level in this video. So we're going to be talking about how to use things like adjustments to change the color or the contrast of your image. We're going to go a little more in depth into how to use layers in Photoshop. We're going to learn how to cleverly disguise where we've removed something from an image. And we're going to go over how to add text. So without further ado, let's get started. So here I've got a picture of my dog that I want to add to my poster. And I want to cut out the head like I did for my cat. But I want to start with a different tool this time than just going with the brush tool. But I want to approach making the mask a little bit differently, in a way that would be a little bit easier to use with a mouse rather than the brush tool, which I used last video. So I'm going to use my polygon lasso tool, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to start clicking right on the edge of what I want to cut out when I make my mask. And if you make a mistake, you can hit backspace to go back 1 point. And I'm just going to keep going around. And what I'm going to do is, once I have this selection, I'm going to make my mask from that selection. If you need to move your canvas around while you're working on this, you can hold space and click and drag. I can come back in later once I've made my mask and make changes if I'm unhappy with my initial selection. Once you come back around, go ahead and click the first point that you made to complete the selection. All right, once I've got my selection, I'm going to go down over here and hit my Add Layer Mask button. And it's not perfect, but I think it's a pretty good start. And then I can make little adjustments with my brush tool if I feel it's necessary. Maybe soften out this area right here, since that's where her fur is kind of sticking up more, while not trying to get too much of that background in. Don't forget, you can swap between your primary and secondary colors by pressing the X button. This is a pretty quick way to switch between adding and subtracting from a mask. Alright, I think it's pretty good. So I'm going to hit Control T to enter my free transform mode, and I'm going to scale her head down like this and put her over little Grogu's head. But I think I want her head to face the other direction, like with Grogu. So to flip my image around, I can hit right click and go down to flip horizontal. And there we go. So that's a pretty good fit so far, but I want to change the color. I want Willow to be a bit more green like Grogu is. There's a couple different options I have to do that. But first I want to make a couple different layers so I can show you all the different ways that I can approach this. So I've got my Willow layer selected, and to make a duplicate, I can right click it and go up here to duplicate layer, and a pop-up will come up. I'll just leave it as is, Willow copy. Okay. And then with my move tool selected, I can move it around and see that I have 2 layers. Also, I'm in the move tool. I could just automatically make a new layer by holding Alt and then clicking and dragging, and that will automatically make me a new layer. But I'll just undo that for now. Next, I want to talk about the difference between rasterized layers and smart object layers. So when a layer is rasterized, that basically means that the image is made out of pixels. This is sort of the default mode of anything in Photoshop. While a smart object is usually something that you've imported into Photoshop, like these photos. Technically speaking, these layers are vector-based rather than pixel-based. Without getting too deep into the mathematical technicalities of it, basically a vector-based layer retains detail when it is transformed or scaled up or down better than a pixel-based rasterized layer, because it is being referenced from a external file, so it always has that original information retained. Whereas when working with pixels, the changes you make are permanent, or you might say that they are destructive. The benefit to working with a rasterized layer, however, is that you have a lot more freedom in what you can do with the image, because it isn't adhering to whatever external file you imported it from. So this picture of Willow is a smart object, and I can tell because it's got this little icon in the bottom right of the layer thumbnail. Also, if I right click the layer, it gives me the option to rasterize the layer. And what that will do is that it will convert the smart object into pixels. So I'm going to go ahead and rasterize it. And now you can see the difference between this one and this one. This one is rasterized and this one is a smart object. Now that might not seem like anything really changed, but if we were to select both of these layers, and I can do that by holding Shift and then clicking the next layer down. I'm going to hit Control T to transform both of them, and then I'm going to scale them down. And when you scale down pixels, you will lose information. Whereas with a smart object, because it's a vector image that's referencing an actual file, it will not lose any quality. And so when I scale it up, hit Enter, you see that the smart object retained that information, but the rasterized layer, which is pixels, lost the information. So in short, think of the rasterized layers as being more workable, but a bit more destructive as you work with them. So now I've ruined the quality of the rasterized layer. I'm going to go ahead and delete it. And I'm going to hold Alt and drag off of the smart object to make a copy. I'm going to rasterize this one as well. So we're back where we started. One rasterized layer, one smart object. Now let's talk about adjustments. So adjustments can be found up here under Image, Adjustments. And these give us different options for altering our layers. These have to do with changing hue and saturation, or the contrast, or things like that. So for example, I'm going to go to hue saturation. And right now I have my rasterized layer selected. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the hue slider around and change the hue of my layer. And drop down the saturation, bring up the lightness a little bit, hit OK. And that applies the changes directly to the pixels on my rasterized layer. Meanwhile, I'm going to do the same thing on my smart object layer. Adjustments, saturation. Let's make this one red. And you can see, instead of applying to the pixels, it actually added a filter to my layer just underneath, labeled hue saturation. So if I click the little eyeball, I can turn on and off the visibility of this filter, because it can't make actual changes to the smart object. So just something to keep in mind when you're working with adjustments is that they will apply differently depending on what kind of layer you're working with. So that's one way you can make adjustments to your layers. Now let's explore one more option. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that copy, and I'm going to right click my filter mask and select delete filter mask. Clear smart filters. And now under my layers window, between create layer mask and create a folder, I'm going to hit this button that is to create, fill, or adjustment layer. And you'll notice that a lot of these look like the adjustments that we just saw up in the images window. So I'm going to hit hue/saturation. And up above in our properties window, we have the same options. So we can change the hue. And whoa, it is affecting my entire image. It looks pretty interesting, but that's not what we want. I just want to affect my dog's head. Luckily, I have the ability to limit what layers this adjustment layer affects. So I'm going to click my hue/saturation layer. I'm going to hold Alt. I'm going to click the line between the adjustment layer and my dog layer. And you can see that this little arrow has appeared, pointing down to the layer below. And now the only thing being affected is the layer with my dog's head on it. And the nice thing about adjustment layers is that I can continue to make changes after I've created them initially. So to go into more detail about what's actually happening here, when I alt-clicked on the line between these two layers, it turned the bottom layer into a clipping mask for the layer above it. So just like this icon here is a mask for this layer is now acting as a mask for my hue/saturation layer. Now only the slot below my adjustment layer can act as a mask. So for example, as things are right now, I can't have Pearl also act as a mask. I have to move the hue/saturation layer down and make her the mask that way. Also notice that when I move the adjustment layer down below my dog's head, it no longer affected her because the layers work in a hierarchy and they're layered on top of each other. So move this back up. And let's say that I'm really dead set on having this hue saturation layer affect both my cat's head and my dog's head. Well, there is a workaround, and that is with a group. Now to create a group, we can click this little folder icon, and it will create a group in my layers window. And to add layers to the group, all I have to do is select them and then click and drag them into the group. And the group can be minimized or expanded with the little arrow here. And you can use the group to turn on and off the visibility of all the layers within it. And very important, if I move my adjustment layer above the group and then use the group as my clipping mask, then all the layers within the group act as the mask. Now, I just kind of wanted to show that off, but I don't want Pearl's head to be green too. I just want it to be Willow's head. So I'm going to move Pearl out of the group. But I think for now, I'll leave Willow in this group. All right, now back up to Pearl. I want to continue to work with the colors to help her blend in a bit more. Because right now, the way she's colored does not feel like she fits in with the rest of the image. It's going to be pretty hard to get it exact, but I can tweak it around a bit to get it to be closer at least. So one approach I could take is to work with layer blending modes. And to do that, I'm going to start by using my eyedropper tool to grab just like any spot in the sky. And I make a new layer. And I hit G to go to my fill tool. And I'm going to fill this layer in with just that color. And then holding Alt, clicking between the layers, I'm going to make a clipping mask. So now it's only covering Pearl. So this is a bit overboard. I can't see Pearl's face at all now. That is because this layer is at 100% opacity and it is on a normal blending mode. So first of all, on the right side, every layer has an opacity value, which means if I turn this down, it will make the layer transparent. And I can go down all the way to 0 or anywhere in between. Furthermore, next to that is my blending modes. And the blending modes are essentially how the colors from this layer are being applied to the image overall. So normal is just straight up, here is the color. But going down, there are a lot of different options for how I can apply this. For example, I can set this to multiply. Because all the colors are just represented as math, essentially what a multiply blending mode layer will do is it will take the color values within this layer and multiply them with the color values of whatever is underneath. This will typically give you a darker appearance because every color is essentially working on a value of 0 to 1, and everything in between is a fraction of some sort. So you're multiplying a fraction by a fraction and getting a smaller number, and therefore a darker color. Meanwhile, in the other direction, there is linear dodge, which is an add function. So it is simply addition between the two colors. And you'll get a lighter color as a result. And so that's just what you need to keep in mind with these blending layers, is that if they have odd results, the way they are named may clue you into what's actually happening. But normally what you would do is you would just go through the blending layers and just kind of scroll through each of them and see if any of them have an appearance that you like for what you're trying to accomplish. I kind of like the look of Soft Light, and I can compare it by clicking the eyeball to turn it on and off. And while not perfect, it does feel like it kind of brings it in a little bit more in line with the moodier colors of the rest of the image. So I think I like that. So let's say I wanted to apply this color to this layer permanently. Well, I can do that, but before I do that, I would be wise to make a duplicate of the layer before doing anything else. So make a duplicate, and notice that making a duplicate undid my clipping mask. So I'm going to have to go back in, hold Alt, click between to reassign the clipping mask. And then what I can do is I can hold Shift and select both these layers. And what I want to do is make them into one layer. I'm going to flatten them down, and that will permanently apply the color changes. So I'm going to right click and merge layers. And now notice the smart object icon has disappeared, meaning this has automatically rasterized the image for me. So now I have to be conscious of that, because now the image is a little bit more destructive, so to speak. In the meantime, I'm going to hide my old Pearl layer. I'm going to name this Pearl 2. So next up, there's something very noticeably missing from Pearl's head. And that is this very orange striking rim light coming from this sunset over here. Now, this might be a bit extra to try and replicate, but I want to try and do it anyway. So I'm going to make a new layer, and with my brush tool selected, I'm going to select kind of that orange color, and I'm going to assign the layer below as a clipping mask. And now, with my brush selected, I'm just going to go along Okay, so I've painted in a little bit, but that's obviously not very good because it's still on normal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down. I think vivid light is what I want. It's a bit extreme right now with how much I've painted, but then I can go back to my eraser tool, pick a soft eraser, and come back in. I'm just going to go back and forth to my eraser, my brush. There, and then I'm going to go back into the opacity and just drop it overall a little bit till it feels natural again. There we go. That blends in a lot better with the surrounding color palettes, I think. Blending modes can be really great too for when you want to blend in images in unique ways. So for example, I'm going to drop in this image of rain. Let's scale it up. I'll hold Shift to scale it vertically. Move it to the top. Let's zoom in. Let's go through the different blending layers I could use it with. And frankly, most of these look pretty bad, but I think Soft Light might be a winner. Drop the opacity a little bit. Or better yet, keep the opacity at full, but then I can apply a mask. I'm going to turn down my opacity on my brush, and I'm going to mask out just slightly the focal points I want to still be visible. So I can still see cat head, dog head. Maybe down here where it's not as important, I can mask out here. So it doesn't really make sense for it to be raining, just because you can still kind of see the stars in the sky. But if just theoretically I wanted it to be a rainy scene, that's one way I could quickly accomplish that. I'm going to hide that for now, though, because I'm not really interested in having a rainy scene. I just wanted to use that as an example. Now I'd like to come back to Willow and continue to work on her colors a bit more. I'm going to duplicate this layer. Copy. I'm going to rasterize it. I'm going to hide the other layer. And also, just while I work on this, I'm going to hide the Willow hue layer because I want to work with the values for now. It'll be easier to work with the values if I don't have an extra adjustment layer over it. So with the Willow group selected, I'm going to make another adjustment layer. I'm going to go to brightness and contrast. Though you can't use multiple layers as a clipping mask combined without there being a group, you can have multiple layers using the same single layer slot as a clipping mask. So right now I have the Willow hue and the brightness contrast layers, both using the Willow group as their clipping mask. I'm going to turn that hue back off. And then with brightness and contrast selected, I'm going to slide up and down the contrast, the brightness. Let's try and get that head to stand out a bit more. It'd be easy to go overboard with the contrast and brightness. And that's all right, but let's say I wanted to have a little bit more control. I could do the same thing, go down here, create a new layer, but this one I'm going to make a levels layer. And this just gives me even finer control over the values that I'm working with on this layer. So using these sliders, I can drag them towards the middle to intensify the darkness or intensify the light, or just the bias that the middle values have between the dark and the light. Also down here, I can clamp my values. So say I don't want anything to be too dark, I can slide this up, and that will lighten anything that is below a certain threshold of darkness. Same with the light, I can darken anything that's too bright. And that seems to be coming along well, but I'm running into an issue where I feel like the eyes are too dark. So I'm going to hide my layers level for now. I'm going to address the concern with the eyes on this layer. So to do that, what I can do is I can use the dodge tool. And the dodge tool can be found over here on the left. And under this category, there's actually three tools. There's the dodge tool, the burden tool, and the sponge tool. The dodge tool essentially adds to whatever values you brush over. So up at the top, you can select the range that it will target the most and the exposure that it will apply. So I'm going to target the shadows because it's pretty dark right here. And I'll leave the exposure at 50. And I'm just going to brush in there. Go in again with midtones. Same to the other side. And just like that, those eyes are starting to pop a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to turn back on my levels. And that looks a bit better. I'm going to delete my brightness and contrast because I don't want that anymore. So let's say I'm finding this to be too evenly lit. and I want to darken some areas to give it some shadow. To do that, I can use the reverse of the dodge tool, which is the burn tool. And it looks like this little hand. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to turn off my levels. I'm going to go ahead and turn off protect tones in this instance. And protect tones just prevents your hues from shifting and tries to preserve some of the color the way it is, but it can get in the way of having the effect you want. So it's up to you to experiment with protect tones or not. I'm going to have a low exposure because this could be pretty intense. And looking the way that Grogu is shaded, the light seems to be coming in from the right. So I'm going to try and put in some shadows on the left side to counteract that. And then maybe I'll come back in with the dodge tool, aim for midtones, and get that rim light in here to offset. And there we go. Now there's a bit more of a specific light direction happening. I'm not entirely happy with these results yet. This would take some time to really refine and get looking right. And luckily I saved that other version. So if I did want to go back, I could just go back to the older copy of this layer. But I think this made a big difference, actually. It's not quite realistic, but it's certainly in line with kind of this intensely shaded cinematic poster aesthetic. And I'm going to turn back on the Willow hue. Adjust this a bit to make it a bit more blue. Trying to go for that Grogu look. I think I'll even go ahead and move Willow for a second. Just try to hone it in. Like that. Now I'm happy with her fur color, but I want to bring back the color of her eyes from before. I can, of course, go into my Willow hue, and there's already a mask applied to it, and it's all white, so all I have to do is come in with a black color and paint in here. Turn up the opacity, and I can bring back that old color. Let me bring it back on the nose as well. Make some adjustments to the levels, and I've made adjustments to the basic layer. I don't need to make that contrast quite as intense as before. There we go. I think I'll go back to the pearl layer. Play with the levels here as well. Give it a bit more of a cinematic lighting. So I could keep fussing with this forever and make it as flashy as I want it to be. But I think I'm getting pretty close to where I want to stop. However, before I get to that point, I want to at least make sure that I change the text. Because I don't want this to be The Mandalorian. This is something else. Something completely different. And before I can change the text, first I have to get rid of the existing text. So to do that, we are going to use a content-aware fill. So first off, I'm going to go to my rectangular marquee select tool, and I'm just going to click and drag to make a box around that text. And before I do anything else, before I forget, I'm going to duplicate my Mandalorian poster layer. And I'm going to go ahead and rasterize it right away. So I have a copy of the old one, but now I'm working on a new layer. And now in my selection, I'm going to right click. I'm going to select Content Aware Fill. and it will pop up this preview of what my content aware fill will look like. And basically what this does is it's already sort of made a selection in green of what it thinks I want to use as a sample for what I want to fill in the middle here. So that's what context aware fill means in this instance, is using the surrounding pixels to generate a pattern to fill my selection with. It's a very advanced tool and a very neat tool, but it's not perfect, and you will likely still need to do some touch-ups on it after you're done with it. So I'm going to come in and take out some of the stuff I don't want. And then I'm going to hit OK to apply it. And that came out pretty good. In this instance, it's made a new layer above the copy that I was already working with. Now there is still a bit of a line here where it goes from the fill to the original. So actually I'm going to merge this down. And I want to just do a little bit of work to fix this up a little bit. So what I can do is I can go over here to my clone stamp tool. And what this lets me do is copy one area of pixels and paint with a copy of those pixels somewhere else. So I'm going to hit Alt. I'm going to click just anywhere. Let's say here. And now you can see I can drag over here. And you can see the after image of where I Alt clicked under my brush. And I'm just going to tap. And you can see that already kind of filled in this area with that. You might not want to work with 100% opacity. You might want to drag that down to a lower opacity. I'm going to click maybe here. It's good to alternate where you are copying from so you don't keep getting the same patterns re-emerging where you're painting. And I'm just going to tap once. That's pretty good, but I could also tap a couple times to get that fuller opacity. And I'm just going to work around this border just because I'm being especially particular about it to make sure it looks decent. I'm also just trying to go around the middle and fill in with some detail because the automatic process came out pretty mushy and indistinct. So if I could just fill in a few of those areas with just a bit more of that pattern, it'll look a bit better. And that looks pretty good for something that took like 5 minutes at most. So with the text removed, now it's time to bring in our new text. So to do that, I'm going to select my text tool. And then what I want is to find a font that matches pretty closely with this font. Luckily, I found what is a pretty close match on the internet. So I've got this mandalore.ttf file. And all I have to do to bring this into Photoshop is right-click it and hit Install. And then once I've done that, I'm going to go to my text tool. And up here, you can change your font. And by default, you should have a ton of fonts already installed. And I'm just going to scroll down. And right here is Mandalore. I'm going to select it. Make sure my text tool is selected. And I make sure I am on my Mandalorian poster layer. And then I'm just going to click in the canvas. And with my text selected, and go up here and change the color. Make sure it's white, or better yet, with the color picker window open, I can eyedrop select right here, just in case that white is a little different, but it doesn't look significantly different. So I think I can just leave it at a pure white. If you select out of your text and you want to go back to editing it, double click the T in your text layer that was created when you added the text in. And just like any other layer, you can use the move tool to move the text around. And then change the size of your font. You can go up to here, select a new number, or even input your own. Let's say 100. Or I can even click and drag this T here and just scale it up this way. And I want to match the size of the previous text. So I'm going to hide my layer with the text removed to see the original text. So now with that visible, I'm going to match the new text to the size of the old. I'm just going to scale it up until the heights match like that. Okay. Drag this to the center. And I can bring back the blank one. And finally, I can rename this show to the Nyan DeLorean. There seems to be a couple things wrong with this text. All the letters are touching too much. So I think my settings are a bit off. So you can adjust your font settings by bringing up Window, going down and selecting Character. And that will open up this character window over here on the right, which can be opened and closed by pressing the little A. And say I think this is the problem. So if I set this to 0, there, my spacing returns to normal. So there's one more thing I want to do that I probably should have done earlier, but I've put it off for a little bit. And that is to crop my canvas so that I can get rid of these white borders on the sides, and so I'm left with just the poster. One way I could do that if I wasn't trying to get an exact size is I could go up to Image, go to Canvas Size, and I could just change the width to something like 800 pixels and hit OK. And then make a guess and find out that it cropped my image. And that's not what I want. But what I can do instead is I can go over here to the crop tool, which can be accessed with the C key. And it brings up these bars on the sides of my canvas, which I can drag in. Once I'm happy with the crop, I can hit Enter to confirm, and then I can go over to the other side and do the same thing. And there's the final result. So now that I'm at a place that I'm fairly happy with, it's time to export my image. To do that, I'm going to go to File, Export, and then Export As. That'll bring up this window, which we saw in the last video. You can leave all these settings as is. Just make sure that your format is PNG, and then hit Export. That'll open your file browser where you can select a folder to export to, and then you can give your new file a name. By default, the file name will be the name of your PSD file, but I'm going to give mine a new name. Then once you're ready, go ahead and hit save. So with that, I hope you have fun making all of your wildest poster dreams. And until next time, I hope you have a good one.